a distinguished panel to lead the discussion on how African governments can benefit from the opportunities and manage the risk associated with the development of nuclear energy technologies. But before giving the floor to the panelists, and in order to introduce this session, I'm delighted to welcome Her Excellency Amélie de Montchalin, Permanent Representative of France to the OECD. Madame de Montchalin, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, cher monsieur le directeur général, cher directeur général également de l'autorité du Ghana et cher Raga, ici du Centre de développement. Merci beaucoup d'avoir organisé cet événement dans le cadre donc, de ce sommet pour un nouveau pacte financier mondial qui vient tout juste de se conclure, puisqu'il y a encore moins d'une heure, les chefs d'État étaient au Palais Brognard. C'est un sommet qui, donc, pendant 2 jours, a réuni plus d'une centaine de chefs d'État et de gouvernement, des centaines de représentants d'organisations internationales, du secteur privé, de la société civile, et qui a permis de vraies avancées. Un pacte de Paris pour les populations et la planète sera publié en conclusion de ces travaux. La question de la transition énergétique des pays africains a évidemment été au cœur des discussions et je tiens notamment à vous signaler la publication d'un très important rapport de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie et de la Société financière internationale, l'IFC, qui a hier donc présenté dans le cadre de ce sommet l'état des lieux du financement des énergies propres dans les pays émergents et les pays en développement. Il ressort de ce rapport que si on prend tous les pays émergents et en développement, hors Chine, les financements pour les énergies propres sont restés stables depuis 2015, alors qu'ils augmentent partout ailleurs sur la planète. Et en particulier, un chiffre est très frappant et a été au cœur des discussions des 2 derniers jours parce qu'il doit nous appeler à l'action, c'est qu'en 2022, tout le continent africain n'a reçu que 32 milliards de dollars pour financer ces énergies propres, c'est-à-dire 4% des financements mondiaux. Heureusement, des choses progressent. Après l'Afrique du Sud, c'est donc le Sénégal qui maintenant a accès à un JETP, un partenariat pour la transition énergétique juste, qui a été annoncé pendant ce sommet, pour atteindre 40% d'énergie renouvelable en 2030 au Sénégal, grâce à un soutien financier des partenaires du G7 et de partenaires privés, et de philanthropie également, de à peu près 2,5 milliards de dollars. Alors, en ouverture de ce sommet, le président de la République, et ça fera partie du pacte qui est en cours de conclusion, il a été affirmé qu'un des principes fondateurs de ce qui doit être un système financier efficace, vu les enjeux de développement que nous avons au XXIe siècle, c'est que les pays puissent faire souverainement leurs choix stratégiques, leurs choix énergétiques. Extrêmement important, alors que tous les pays ont pris des engagements mondiaux lors de la COP de Paris et par l'accord de Paris pour atteindre la neutralité carbone, nous pouvons, dans ce cadre contraignant, évidemment reconnaître que c'est à chaque pays de définir la trajectoire et la manière d'arriver à cet objectif. Le choix du nucléaire par de nombreux pays pour assurer leur transition bas carbone et pour assurer leur sécurité énergétique, on le sait, fait partie de plus en plus de choix que certains pays expriment. Beaucoup de pays font du nucléaire un atout dans la lutte contre la crise climatique et pour la sécurité énergétique, et en particulier les nouvelles technologies, et je pense en particulier aux SMR, aux petits réacteurs modulaires nucléaires, on le sait, présentent beaucoup d'avantages pour avoir un accès à une énergie décarbonée, en particulier dans des pays qui n'ont pas les réseaux électriques et les infrastructures, notamment de distribution, adaptées à des solutions plus importantes en taille. La France, donc, soutient, participe, développe très activement ces nouveaux types de réacteurs, ces SMR, mais il est utile, et c'est le thème de la discussion d'aujourd'hui, de bien examiner les conditions du développement sûr, c'est-à-dire avec sécurité, du nucléaire dans ce contexte sur le continent africain. Évidemment, déployer des SMR devra s'accompagner d'un développement d'une maîtrise des compétences relatives à la sûreté pour tous ces nouveaux entrants. Et si des efforts sont faits, évidemment, pour améliorer le safety by design, c'est-à-dire la sûreté intrinsèque des technologies, il est essentiel que les autorités nationales, que les gouvernements se pensent dès maintenant et puissent être dans le temps totalement comptables vis-à-vis de leur population concernant la sûreté d'utilisation de ces SMR installés dans leur territoire. Deuxième élément qui est clé pour le développement de ces technologies, un peu moins lié à la sûreté, même si évidemment les choses sont liées, c'est l'accès au financement. Parce qu'on peut vouloir évidemment les pays qui aujourd'hui développent ces technologies, les pays qui souhaitent les accueillir, vouloir que les choses se développent plus avant, et nous le soutenons comme vous comprenez. Néanmoins, il va falloir qu'on trouve des financements. Et le rôle des banques multilatérales de développement dans le financement nucléaire est aussi une question importante qui méritera d'être abordée dans le cadre de la réforme de l'architecture financière telle qu'elle a été initiée lors des 2 derniers jours, et notamment à la Banque mondiale, où vous savez qu'une nouvelle feuille de route d'évolution est en réflexion. Donc, ce sont de toutes ces questions dont il va être question aujourd'hui. Je suis donc très heureuse qu'elles soient à l'agenda. Et je laisse le directeur général et notre ancien haut commissaire à l'énergie atomique modérer cette session à laquelle je suis très heureuse de participer. Merci beaucoup.
Just for introduction, you must know that in 2020, over 600 million of Africans had no access to electricity, and the per capita electricity consumption in sub-Saharan Africa was the lowest in the world. Electricity generation in Africa is still largely dependent on fossil fuels. The hydroelectricity, the renewable energies, and the nuclear energy respectively represents 15%, 4%, and less than 2% of the African electricity mix. Everywhere on planet Earth, this last decade has been marked by a growing awareness for environmental issues, in particular climate change, and a growing sense of responsibility towards future generations, which means deploying capacities to gradually decarbonize the global energy production. Numerous studies and projections for the coming decades show that the contribution of nuclear energy is essential for limiting climate change and offering solutions for the sustainable development. For example, IAEA projection for 2050 show that current nuclear power capacity will need to be at least doubled by 2050 to meet the Paris Agreement objectives. Recent innovation in nuclear reactor aims at contributing to this effort, both in countries already equipped with nuclear infrastructures and for newcomers. The impressive development of small reactor design projects aims at industrializing flexible technologies for producing different energy carriers like electricity, heat, and hydrogen, and supplying services to society that can also be easily integrated with solar and wind energy. Besides offering a real and unique opportunity, the design and implementation of new nuclear reactors must take into account the long-term climate uncertainties, as well as local geographical and political specificities, and provide integrated solutions adapted to each site. They should also consider the overall cycle, including the back end and the waste management of nuclear cycle. With its population growing significantly, the African continent is facing a real need for economic, industrial, and infrastructural development. This is why, considering this growing need for energy, several African countries have expressed their desire to develop nuclear power to supply the electricity needs. But there are still technical, financial, and human obstacles that could limit the scope of these ambitions. The present side event will examine what is needed for the safe and secure deployment of nuclear energy in the African context. Panelists will also discuss physical infrastructure needs, human resource development, and the regulatory frameworks necessary if this technology is to contribute to Africa achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Indeed, the question of human organization in civil nuclear power is crucial for candidate countries in terms of policy, national strategy, management and organization methods, legal framework, and staff qualification. To address these different issues, on behalf of NEA, I am pleased to welcome African and international experts to shed light on the needs and prospects associated with the development of nuclear power generation in the African continent. Mr. William McWood, who is the Director General of OECD, Raga Arnaudottir, who is Director of OECD Development Centre, Mr. Samuel Dampare, who is Director General of Ghana Atomic Commission, Energy Commission, and we have two additional panelists who join us via Zoom, Enobot Agboro, who is the Executive Secretary, African Commission on Nuclear Energy, and Jennifer Norquist, who is Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So you will see that this session will be divided in two parts. First, each panelist will be invited to make an oral intervention in response to questions that have been prepared in order to illustrate the different aspects of the session topics. Each panelist will have around 7 minutes. At the end of this presentation, each panelist will be invited to react to the points made by his or her colleagues. In the second part, we will have approximately 30 minutes for discussion with the audience attending the side event in this room or via Zoom. And the closing remarks will be made by Her Excellency Ambassador Amélie de Montchalin. I would like to start if Mr. Agboro is connected with us by Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Agboro. You are Executive Secretary of the Executive Secretary is the National of Cameroon. AFCON is the leading nuclear organization in Africa, uniquely mandated to oversee and coordinate nuclear activities and cooperation in Africa. You have been previously employed at the International Atomic Energy Agency and brings over 30 years of experience in nuclear diplomacy, non-proliferation, and the promotion of peaceful use of nuclear energy to the position. You hold a master's degrees in nuclear reactor science and engineering from the University of London. The question we would like to ask you is based on the report of IEA, which presents a sustainable Africa scenario designed to enable the African continent to achieve its energy-related development on time. In this scenario, Africa consumption of primary energy, excluding traditional biomass, could increase by an average of 3% per year from now to 2030. This will probably deeply modify the future energy mixes of African countries. On this basis, do you envisage nuclear energy as being, in a near future, a real part of the African energy mix, and also taking into account the large energy expansion envisioned by African governments to meet the energy access and industrialization needs? What are the opportunities and challenges for nuclear energy? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Let me apologize that I cannot get my Zoom working properly on the laptop, so I'm using my telephone. And let me start by thanking the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency and the OECD Development Centre for organizing this important and timely event. Yes, is the answer to your question. I do envisage nuclear energy to be a part of the African energy mix. The main reason for that is the energy poverty in Africa. As we heard a few minutes ago, Africa has the lowest per capita access to electricity, with 80% of Africans, without access to electricity, while the small percentage that does have access does not have it reliably. So Africa is clearly hungry for energy in order to have an industrial, socio-economic development. Africa does have huge resources of renewables, such as solar, and these resources will obviously be leveraged. But most renewables have issues with lifespan, with intermittency, with reliability. So it is unlikely that renewables will be the central pillar in Africa's energy future. With regard to fossil fuels, they are also not likely to be the future because of issues with the climate emergency. So that leaves nuclear power as the strongest option in terms of providing baseload electricity. So my expectation is that as we move into the future and we strive towards having zero carbon, nuclear energy, nuclear power will be the central pillar in Africa's electricity mixes, with probably solar and hydro in the second tier. With regard to your second part of your question about the opportunities and challenges of nuclear energy, I should start by saying that most African countries, almost all of them, are currently not technology holders in the nuclear power technology. So in order for African countries to acquire nuclear power, African countries must cooperate and trade with foreign nuclear power technology holders. So in that context, I would like to state the main reason that enables or that would enable African countries to engage in this international trade and cooperation. And that is Article 4 of the NPT, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which gives every country a right to develop and to cooperate in the development and deployment of the peaceful applications of nuclear energy, which include nuclear power for the production of electricity. But there is a caveat. This right requires the states to adhere to Articles 1 and 2 of the NPT, which are the articles on nuclear non-proliferation, that is safeguards on nuclear security. So safeguards on nuclear security, I think, are the first challenges to African countries deploying nuclear power. Over 90% of African countries have concluded safeguards agreements with the IAEA, and over 80% are party to the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty, that's the Treaty of Pelindaba. And both these multilateral arrangements come with safeguards obligations. And with regard to safeguards, the African Commission on Nuclear Energy, my organization, has established 2 safeguards regional collaborating centers in Africa to ensure that capacity to adhere to the safeguards obligations can be developed sustainably on the continent. With regard to nuclear security, Article 10 of the Treaty of Pelindaba obliges state parties to adhere to the CPPNM, that's the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, and its amendment, and also to adopt the recommendations on nuclear security from the IAEA. So with regard to complying with safeguards and nuclear security obligations, I think African countries are sort of well positioned. And also the African Commission on Nuclear Energy recently in Morocco established a nuclear security regional collaborating center. So these are all steps and efforts that we are taking to ensure that we are in good stead with regard to meeting our obligations on nuclear non-proliferation. Other challenges that African countries face in developing nuclear power are the public perception of nuclear energy in Africa. Many Africans believe that nuclear energy has to do with military applications. So we need to deploy efforts to change this perception. Another challenge is the international anti-nuclear lobby. And of course, financing is a challenge that we cannot escape from. But opportunities that exist, I mentioned the African Commission on Nuclear Energy is itself an opportunity because it's an organization that strives to bring together African expertise and working with partners in Africa and overseas to drive and to develop nuclear energy in Africa safely and securely. Another opportunity is that nuclear power technology already exists in the big builds. So we can go towards the big builds. We can collaborate with the IAEA on the milestones approach of the IMPRO methodology. And with regard to SMRs, it's another opportunity that is available and that we can consider in the development of nuclear power in Africa. I think I've sort of covered both questions, and I'll be happy to provide more details in the Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Agboro. Now I will introduce and welcome Professor Samuel Dampare. You are Director General of Ghana Atomic Energy Commission. And after obtaining your PhD, you were awarded of a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship in Japan, I understand. And your scientific career at the Ghana Atomic Commission started in 2002 as an assistant research scientist, and then you were promoted the principal research scientist in 2011 and chief research scientist in 2018. You have participated in the governance of the Ghana Atomic Commission on several boards and committees, and you have also served on external boards and committees, including the College of Basic and Applied Sciences and the Council of Ghana Institution of Geoscientists. You have authored and co-authored more than 75 papers in international and national major peer-reviewed journals. You serve as a member of the African Union Commission, AMREC working group, and the project counterpart for Ghana for some IAEA technical cooperation project. Professor Dampare, current events show that what extent the performance of an energy mix is essential, both in terms of national or continental autonomy, sovereignty, and resilience when facing crisis, and the ability of providing reliable, suitable energy at the right place for the consumers. As Ghana is embarking on this venture, what steps has your government taken to ensure effective governance and to prepare relevant solutions? And the second question, what are your needs for potential development of nuclear energy in Ghana? And how do you expect to build additional capacity for infrastructures and regulatory framework? And finally, how do you think the international community can be involved to support your objectives? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. And let me take this opportunity to thank OECD, Nuclear Energy Agency, and the OECD Development Centre for inviting Ghana Atomic Energy Commission to participate in this important discussion. And then also the Excellencies here, also thank you for this opportunity to interact with you. As you rightly said, actually, Ghana started this nuclear stuff, introducing nuclear energy into its energy mix way back in 1960. That's our first president, also Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, That was the idea for establishing Ghana Atomic Energy Agency in 1963 by an act of Parliament, so that you look at the peaceful uses of nuclear energy for socio-economic development. And in that case, you're looking at both power and non-power applications. So in the area of health, agriculture, industry, and all that, and then power aspect. But somewhere along the line, this dream or vision was truncated to political issue like coup, d'etat, and all that. So let's say that there was a hiatus, there was a break in that. And then in 1970, that is in the 70s, we revisited this nuclear stuff. And then the focus was more on non-power aspects. As we said, we are embarking a country as far as nuclear energy is concerned, but that is the history. So we started something, but let's say that it became forceful maybe in 2015, when the government also started taking some steps as far as building relevant institutions or key institutions are concerned, and then promulgating relevant laws. So based on that, the Parliament of Ghana in 2015 promulgated the law, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Authority Act, that is Act 895 of 2015. And for us to look at the regulations, and then regulations govern the practices and activities of peaceful uses of this nuclear energy. And this act led to the establishment of Nuclear Regulatory Authority. So this is an independent body, which is different from setup, which is different from maybe the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission. And this body is supposed to regulate the nuclear industry with respect to maybe the safety, security, non-proliferation, and nuclear liability, and all that. So that was one of the things that we have a independent regulatory authority or independent regulatory body in place. And then secondly, we have this, what we call, the Nuclear Energy Planning Implementation Organization, that is NEPIO. We have the Ghanaian version, which is the Ghana Nuclear Program Organization, that's the GNPPO. So GNPPO is supposed to lead the development of this nuclear power, the nuclear program. At first, it wasn't that vibrant, let me put it that way, but we have also revived it, and it was put under Ministry of Energy. But recently, the president says that it has to move to the presidency so that he has the government oversight responsibility, because we know that the GNPP has to carry the program, so it's been moved to the presidency, and with the chairman, either be the president or his representative, and then we have the relevant institutions also having representatives, and so as far as that aspect is concerned, so we have established GNPPO, and then we've also promulgated these laws. Another thing is human capacity development. What we did was that Ghana established the School of Nuclear and Allied Sciences, and this school was a joint establishment between University of Ghana and then the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission with the support of International Atomic Energy Agency. So this was for training of the graduate student, that's the PhD and then master's level. So we have built this knowledge base through that. And then one of the things we have also done with respect to these relevant institutions is that we have Nuclear Power Ghana, and it's supposed to be the owner operator. So what is done is that is leading the project of Ghana constructing the first nuclear power plant. So we have the program, they have the project. So we have this Nuclear Power Ghana. And this Nuclear Power Ghana comprises 3 key institutions: Ghana Atomic Energy as the technical arm, and then using one of its institutes we call Nuclear Power Institute. And then we have Bui Power Authority, and then we have Water River Authority. These people have experience in the hydro sector and then the thermal sector. So in the government's own wisdom, it said that these two, with this experience, should team up with Ghana Atomic Energy Commission to establish this NP, that's the Nuclear Power Ghana. We have that experience for the construction of the first nuclear power plant. So that is what I'll say as far as maybe the relevant institutions are concerned. We have put them in place, and then we have the school and other things coming on board. Then when you ask about what we need, I think you asked the second question, which I'll also say that now we have established ourselves, especially when it comes to Ghana, and with the school, we have that knowledge base in terms of nuclear. And what we are trying to do is that we want to become a hub, a regional hub for the African region. So the knowledge that we have acquired so far, we also want to share it among the African region. And we started some discussions with, if you take United States and Japan, during the interministerial conference in October 2022 in Washington, we announced, that is United States and then Japan, announced that they want to have a regional hub in Ghana. And in that case, Ghana will be a mover for the deployment of small modular reactor. So we want this hub to come to pass with what we had experienced and those we are partnering to do that. And then during the COP 27, the United States Department of Energy also made a statement, in which we are in talks with them that they want us to have clean energy training center in Ghana, and that's to be hosted by Ghana Atomic Energy Commission, because we want to train people in the area of the technical aspects as well, maybe welders, engineers, and other things. So this training center will also serve the African region. So we need this support, or we need such partnership to help not only Ghana, but the African region. And then when it comes to the regulatory aspect, we still need support. We want to build more capacity in that area, as far as maybe authorization, inspection, review of application along the whole line. We have various stages of this nuclear program. So it means that our nuclear regulatory authority, the people working there, to have expertise in some of these things. And So this is what we also need as far as our program is concerned. And as new things are coming on board, like the SMR and other things are coming on board, we still need to improve our capacity in this area as far as the regulatory framework is concerned. So that is what I would say for now. But the other thing is that if you want to, as you all know, getting nuclear power plants involves a lot of money. So our government cannot do it. You need support. So in the area of funding and financing, we're also interested in that. So apart from capacity building in some of the areas that I've mentioned, we also need funding and financing, strategic partners and all that. Even when it comes to this regulatory thing, if we can get fellowships for our people, our workers to go to other advanced countries to learn what is going on and have this exchange or interactions, we can learn from their experience and it will help us a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dampare. Our next panelist is Jennifer Norquist. Jennifer should be connected by Zoom. She is the Executive Vice President of Economic Innovation Group, a bipartisan policy incubator, which is dedicated to forging a more dynamic, entrepreneurial and innovative economy. Previously, she represented the United States on the board of directors of the World Bank Group. She helped steer the World Bank's COVID response and worked on the debt service suspension initiative, climate policy, technology procurement, and so on. Prior to the World Bank, Ms. Norquist served as Chief of Staff at the White House Council of Economic Advisors and a host of other prominent leadership roles, including at the Brookings Institution and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She began her career working in both the U.S. House and Senate. She has been published in renowned periodicals and journals such as the Wall Street Journal or Fortune. She holds a BA from Stanford University and a MS from the Northwestern University. Jennifer Norquist, in the paper you published in the beginning of this year in January 2023 in Foreign Affairs, the title of the paper is "The World Needs More Nuclear Power." You stress that much more nuclear power needs to happen for the world to stay close to a trajectory of net zero by 2050, and that this requires helping countries finance new projects. You are also emphasizing the potential role of the World Bank, which could create a new co-financing opportunity with the private sector, as well as spur a change at the African Development Bank. I have two questions for you. The first one is, what degree of urgency do you consider for launching those projects? And the second one is, considering that only very few financial institutions finance nuclear energy in developing countries, could you explain why are they reluctant and what would support them if one chooses to pursue this path?
Yeah, I mean, in answer to your question about urgency, I mean, if climate change is an urgent issue that needs to be addressed, then nuclear clearly has to be a part of that solution. You know, I believe the numbers are that we need to double our nuclear power capacity, you know, by 2050 to get to net zero. And in the piece that you referenced, I mean, I did some math, and you know, we need about 25 new nuclear plants a year, and obviously we are nowhere close to that, even in the developing world. I can at least say in the United States, we just had our first major nuclear plant, I believe in 3 decades, just went online, Vogtle, down in the southeastern part of the United States. You know, my view, at least for the World Bank, is that the World Bank is very, very focused on the climate change agenda, and yet nuclear is completely off the table verboten. You can't even say the word nuclear for Harry Potter fans. It's like, you know, saying Voldemort. So I never really understood that. I tried to understand why the bank had a ban on nuclear finance, and because the World Bank doesn't do it, then the African Development Bank doesn't do it, and a host of other, you know, finance organizations don't do it. And I believe the previous speaker mentioned the need for finance. So I think it's a huge issue. It perplexes me that the countries who already have nuclear are trying to stop the developing world, you know, the global South, from having nuclear. I think the technology has advanced quite a bit, that you don't really have to have, you know, huge nuclear plants. You can have these, you know, small modular reactors. Hopefully, you know, micro reactors will also, you know, come online soon. And my experience at the bank was that, you know, the vast majority of the shareholders were interested in having nuclear. In fact, a colleague of mine, Todd Moss, just wrote a piece where he counted up the shareholding and the votes. And by his calculations, there are 50 countries that currently have nuclear, another 50 that are in development or have expressed interest in nuclear. And that's about 80% of World Bank shareholding. And yet the bank seems sort of afraid of itself. Its usual excuse is that it, you know, quote, doesn't have the expertise, but it's unwilling to try to get the expertise. And the bank does all sorts of things that it doesn't have expertise for. I'm pretty sure it didn't know how to do geothermal. And so when they started doing those projects, they hired consultants. There's something like 10,000 consultants that work at the World Bank. So I don't really think that the lack of experience is an excuse. I think it's just like a knee-jerk reaction to this technology, which I don't understand. And in fact, Africa already has obviously a nuclear plant down in South Africa, Coburg, which seems to be doing fine and it's safe. One of the issues that, you know, came up when I discussed this with my counterparts at the bank was, you know, what do you do about the waste? Well, Coburg's waste is stored on site. The United States, we store all of our waste on site, and I believe that's the practice in most other countries. So I also, you know, as I wrote in the piece, I feel like because the World Bank is unwilling to do this financing, countries are, you know, turning to you know, other sovereigns, i.e. the Russians, and now China is getting in the game. And so if the world is, you know, the World Bank and you know, the powers that be in general are worried about, you know, strong ESG standards, the World Bank is the gold standard of ESG, and yet, you know, we have you know, Russia, which, you know, unfortunately controls about 50% of uranium. So, you know, they are going in and doing, you know, basically nuclear diplomacy, which, as we just all are in the middle of witnessing with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you know, we don't necessarily want Russia to control a large power sector. So I guess, you know, the question, you know, you asked is, you know, why the reluctance? I think a little bit, like I said, is hypocrisy. These are, you know, countries that already have nuclear, and I, you know, it's like nuclear for me, but not for thee, which I don't think is a moral. I just think that's not a good moral argument. You know, the same could be said for Europeans who are trying to prevent Africa from, you know, developing its fossil resources while they continue to exploit their own and in fact import natural gas from Africa. So you know, I hope this changes. You know, there was a statement, I think, in the G7 communique about the importance of nuclear. Obviously, the U.S. just signed the U.S.-Africa partnership. We've got, you know, an agreement, a 1-2-3 agreement with Ghana. Two of our senators, it's actually bipartisan, Senator Manchin and Senator Risch, have introduced the Civil Nuclear Export Act so that more of our domestic sort of export finance agencies, which is DFC and EXIM, can get in the game. And the DFC actually used to not do nuclear loans. That was changed in the prior administration, but I don't believe that they have actually gone ahead and done any loans yet. So I hope that they do so soon. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Then we will have a duo of panelists, both William D. McGood IV and Raga Arnaudottir. I can say Raga. Mr. Magwood, you took up your duties as Director General of the Nuclear Energy Agency in 2014. You had extensive experience in both the regulatory and developmental aspects of nuclear energy. From 2010 to 2014, you served as one of the 5 commissioners appointed by the US President and confirmed by US Senate and the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission. From 2005 to 2010, you provided independent strategic and policy advice to US and international clients on energy, environment, education, and technology policy issues. From 1998 to 2005, you were director of the US government's civilian nuclear energy program at the US DOE. Before, you managed electric utility research and nuclear policy programs, and you hold a bachelor degree in physics and English from Carnegie Mellon University and a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Tilburg. Raga, you have been the director of the OECD Development Centre since 2021, and you have served as Minister of Industry and Commerce in Iceland from 2013 to 2017, and you were elected Member of Parliament from 2007 to 2016. Before being elected to Parliament, you were a political advisor of the Minister of Finance, of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and on the Prime Minister. You also worked at the Trade Council of Iceland, both in New York and Reykjavik. You were the chairman of the board of directors of Duty Free Iceland and a member of the board of directors of Landsvirkjun, a national power company. Was I right? Okay. You have a master's degree in foreign service from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and a bachelor degree in political science from the University of Iceland. To both of you, I would like to start and say that Africa is a continent which, according to the IEA, it could become the most dynamic in the energy field in the near future. And the role of the international agencies in charge of nuclear power seems to be really essential in order to provide a step-by-step support for countries which will apply to nuclear power in the future. So I have 2 questions. How do you consider the role of international community in supporting nuclear development of nuclear in Africa? And what are the issues you are identifying that could be tackled through an international cooperation?
Thank you, Bill. That was a very gentlemanlike. He said ladies first. And thank you for the pronunciation of my name. You're practically an Icelander. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I have to give a little forward because Bill and I had lunch a few months back, and we're exploring cooperation. And I have to admit that I was like, yeah, I really would like to cooperate with Bill and his team, but I was like, the development center and nuclear, I didn't really see the immediate twist. But since then, the discussions have developed, and I think it's and you see it from the discussion here today that it's a very pertinent, timely, and important conversation that needs to take place. And it's been interesting to hear. I fully agree with the ambassador that it's a sovereign choice. Every country needs to make a sovereign energy decisions. And Jennifer was very firm in her statements about countries that have nuclear that are preventing or sort of hesitating about Africa. My take and ours at the Development Center is what is best for Africa. That's the starting point where we come from. We are an organization and a center that focuses on discussions on policy issues with our member countries, which are beyond OECD membership. We have 11 African members, for example. So that is our point of departure, if you will. the fact, if we go back to the question and the nuclear question, it is a fact that nuclear development is taking place on the African continent. So that is the fact that we have in front of us, and that's not happening in a vacuum. And we can't pretend that it is otherwise. And there are opportunities and there are challenges that come with that. On the benefit side, and I had a long list of all sorts of facts and figures that I was going to give, but most of them are already here, so I'm just going to dive right into it. From the benefit side, we can mention things like the improved safety features of the small modular reactors and better financing options due to the reduced construction schedules, fewer components, and smaller footprints from these reactors. But there are also risks that come with this development, as we have also heard mentioned here today. The radioactive material, although Jennifer's comparison to what's going on in other countries was also striking, and the possible application of nuclear technology. We also know that the risks could be exacerbated by the governance and security challenges that many African countries face. So these are all the facts on the table. So if we wonder what questions must be considered before going forward, and from the African perspective, and with, again, Africa's interests at heart, how can African countries take advantage of the opportunities that nuclear energy affords, while also managing the responsibility that comes with it? And that raises other questions, including how does nuclear energy fit into Africa's overall energy mix? What does nuclear energy mean for Africa's infrastructure development? How many jobs can the nuclear industry create? And how can we ensure that women have a place in this new labor force? What demands will the nuclear industry place on Africa's education system? And it was very interesting to hear from the experience from Ghana in that. And when it comes to the risk management, we also need to ask, and that has been mentioned here, what does nuclear energy mean for the wider geopolitical context? Many, as has been discussed, many of the countries have signed already agreements with Russia, highlighting also the crucial role that Africa has in the geopolitical landscape of nuclear power. And this is something that needs to also be discussed. And what impact could this have for security on the continent? And what are those challenges that we need to have right in front of us and need to address? Going back to the question of the international, what's the role of the international organization? The question that I asked myself when Bill approached me. There are various roles that international organization can have in sort of helping unpack these questions that I've been throwing out. As I said, we convene stakeholders from across sector, and in order to facilitate global knowledge sharing and bring together expertise on the broader policy landscape in Africa. Just to mention a few, and it's not the advertising section, but I just want to give you an idea of what we do here at the center. On infrastructure, for example, we have a history of partnerships and policy dialogues with the African Union Commission to inform policymakers in the region. On financing, we have a long-standing collaboration with our colleagues from the tax directorate here at the OECD, publishing reports like the revenue statistics in Africa, comparing the different tax structure. And we also have our flagship report every year, the Africa Development Dynamics, which I think after that we might have a topic to discuss in the next one regarding this issue here. And we also help, or the OECD in general also helps African countries advance financing strategies including through the integrated national frameworks facility with UNDESA and the UNDP. And we have since 2005 at the center, we have published extensive at the DCD, at the Development Cooperation Directorate, they have published extensive analysis of trends and financial resource flows in fragile and conflict affected countries and economies, including in Africa. So there's a long list, not to forget our colleagues at the Sahel and West Africa Club, the SWAC, which they offer sort of the nuanced understanding of the security risks in the region, including religious extremism in the pockets that there are dealing with that. So where does that leave us? Maybe to sum it up in one sentence, all of these questions that have been posed and addressed here, it means that policy, legal and regulatory frameworks for nuclear energy in Africa must keep up with the reality on the ground. So I think to get the big picture requires awareness of the wider implications of nuclear energy development on the continent at every step of the way. So we are very much ready to participate in this conversation and offer our expertise, not on nuclear. I will have to rely on my colleague here, but we can help fill in the big picture and are ready to participate in that conversation.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you to have this conversation. This is really one of the first conversations that we've had focusing on Africa, which to some degree highlights what I guess I would call an error on our part to not embrace what is happening in Africa. One of the things that I point to when I think about this is the fact that the great separator between societies as we go forward is going to be access to reliable, high quality electricity. That's going to separate countries that have economies that progress well and grow and provide the needs of their people in the future, and those that don't. And as our colleagues in Europe have found over the last year, when electricity prices get higher, when people start to worry about the reliability of supply, it's a tremendous stress on society. And it's something that people in the other parts of the world have been dealing with on a daily basis for many years. As I talk to many people from embarking countries, they often point to this simple fact, that without access to electricity on a regular basis, reliable supplies, the ability to develop their economies, the ability to progress their societies is always going to be limited. So this is one of the issues that is always on the table. And when you look at countries in Africa, you see, as we've heard from previous speakers, a tremendous gap in the available, reliable electricity. And while I am a firm believer that African countries should exploit the resources they have in terms of wind resources and solar resources, geothermal, just as other countries do, and just as other countries are trying hard to do today, there's always going to be a role for reliable baseload power. Every time we look at this, we look at the analysis very carefully. We believe, from an NEA standpoint, that there needs to be dispatchable resources to supplement renewables for renewables to be effective and for a green economy to be able to provide for industrialization and development and social progress. And for OECD countries, this is really a more of discussion of keeping the social progress and development that we currently have and not backsliding because we're trying to save the environment. But for many other countries, lower income countries, This is a discussion about the future of their people and the ability of their people to reach the aspirations that they have to educate their people, to have better healthcare, to have development, to have strong economies, independent, sovereign economies. And that is going to come down to electricity. And electricity is not the only issue, because I think someone mentioned earlier that the IAEA estimates about a doubling of electricity of nuclear will be necessary to supply electricity. The world's more than just electricity; it's also access to heat, and for the development of clean water and for industrial processes. And when you look at that picture, it's really a tripling of nuclear capacity from our analysis of what's necessary to really meet the targets set by the scientists. So as countries in North America and Europe and other parts of the world go down this path, and our member countries have changed gears quite dramatically in the last few years. Countries that were not talking about nuclear 3 years ago are now talking about it all the time. Countries are making big investments to move in that direction. And while our member countries are taking this path, we are watching while our non-member friends are doing the same in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, and in particular in Africa. And so when I see this situation, and I recognize that Ghana is not a member of the NEA, we don't really have a connection to Ghana. But remember Dev, that is something that we really need to correct. While I have always and will continue to encourage countries that are embarking into the nuclear field to reach out to our colleagues in Vienna at the International Atomic Energy Agency, who have the resources and the skills to help develop the legislation, develop the institutions necessary to assure the safe and secure operation of nuclear facilities. There's a larger aspect to this that I think we in the OECD environment can bring to the table. And that is to look at nuclear as not an end unto itself, but as part of a much bigger picture of electrification, of development, of improving life. And we have the skill set to help with that. So I am committed to doing as much as I can to engage with Ghana and other countries that are taking this path because they have decided to take this path, not because someone encouraged them, but they have decided. And to do what we can to give them the advice, the cooperation, and also to facilitate discussions in the continent itself. And one of our skill sets in the OECD environment, the NEA, is building coalitions to bring people together so they can solve their own problems, not necessarily to rely on outside, but to talk and to cooperate and to leverage the resources. And as Professor Dampier said, the idea that a country like Ghana could be a hub for spreading expertise is an excellent approach. This is exactly the sort of thing we should be doing, and we can help with that. So that's a conversation that's certainly worth having. And I'm really pleased to be sharing a panel with DJ Nordquist. I had this fantasy that she was going to be here in person and we would have a chance to talk in person, but we've known each other for several years and never actually met in person. We've only met on video. So I was hoping to break that trend this time, but unfortunately not. But her comments about the multilateral institutions, I think I sympathize with that entirely, because the frustration that I have had is that the financing of nuclear progress is going to be a barrier for countries that don't currently have the resources to build the facilities. And the multinational system could do a lot more to help. And, I think that sort of echo her comments. I don't understand. I don't understand why they don't want to at least have the conversation. It would be completely within their venue to look at the situation and make the decision, this isn't a good investment, not the best thing for them to do, but to act like the issue doesn't exist is to me not the right path to take. So I hope that does change. Because the larger conference in which this is a side event highlighted something that is so important. And I was listening to some of the speeches from the sessions that were hosted by the French government. And the one element that came out of that conversation, which I think everyone should keep in mind, is that many of the countries that we are talking about in Africa and other parts of the world already have tremendous debt. And the debt is not going down, it's going up as interest rates rise. And so this becomes not just a problem for building nuclear plants, but it becomes a problem for society overall. You can't make the investments for the future. You can't solve the climate crisis. You can't educate people. You can't improve healthcare if all you're doing is paying debt service. So the world has to figure this out, because it is the only way we're going to make progress. It's the only way we're going to see people lift out of poverty. And it's the only way we're going to solve the climate crisis, because countries that can't feed people, that can't educate people, that can't maintain healthcare, they're not going to care about saving the climate. They're going to focus on other things first. So if you're serious about these issues, solve this problem. And I think that this is something that all of us in the OECD venues should commit ourselves to provide the assistance and advice that we can to improve the situation. So what can the international community do to help with this? We can engage, we can cooperate, we can advise, and we can respect the fact the decision ultimately is yours to make. And I'm pointing to Professor Dampier when I say that. It is ultimately the decision of African governments to make. But if we can help facilitate the kind of discussion, exchanges to make that work more effective, then we should do that. And that's something that we certainly expect to be doing.
Thank you. We have, if we want to keep on time, and I'm sure we need to keep on time, we have 10 minutes for global discussions. And maybe if you don't mind, I would like to start with the people who asked questions through the Zoom conference. And I have a first question, which I think is dedicated to you, Mr. Dampare. Does Ghana's vision of being a regional hub extend to a multilateral regulatory framework that would encompass several countries across the African continent? And is there interest in multilateral agreements with the United States? But I think you answered to this question.
Yes. So the answer is yes. And as the previous speaker said, tapping into your experience, if it's a regional hub, other Africans can also benefit from that. So his question is, yes, it will encompass everybody within the African region. And the second part, we have this agreement, the 123 agreement with the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a second question, which is probably dedicated to Jennifer Norquist. And the question is, what is the difference between funding and financing in this large-scale project or mega project like the construction of nuclear reactors?
Thanks. I saw that question and I was hoping I wasn't going to get asked it, because I don't know. I thought they were the same. Maybe I'm wrong, but financing obviously is a loan. I mean, funding, funding can come in the form of a loan. And I think as Bill mentioned, and hey, Bill, next time you want to take me to Paris, I will be there. I would, a lot of these countries are really struggling with debt service. And that's mainly from infrastructure projects, mainly funded by the Chinese. And a lot of those infrastructure projects, I think these countries are learning, didn't make a lot of sense. And some of the quality of the construction has not been great. And China's imported a lot of its own workers for those projects. So that there's very little, I would say, development impact. I know there was a discussion earlier about jobs. I mean, part of development is to create jobs with these projects. And so you want to make sure that they're hiring local workers. So yeah, I mean, funding is obviously a huge issue. You don't want to add to the debt burden, but that's why the multilateral development banks are so important, because they are lending at, concessional rates. So, below what a private bank would lend at. and they're, longer tenors for the amount of time that you pay back, and the World Bank and the other development banks are going to monitor everything and make sure that everything is working. I'm not sure that's the same kind of service that you get when you take a loan from the PRC. And really, that was one of the points in my op-ed, which is like, because the World Bank is not doing any of these loans, these countries, they need energy. As Bill said, like, you need energy to develop. I can't think of an example in the history of humankind where a country developed without a secure energy source. And solar and wind and geo and hydro, those are all great sources. Nuclear has, base load capacity, as Bill said, like, it's good to have a mix. You need all of the above. And so, hopefully the World Bank will get in this game. I feel like there's increasing pressure on them. I was sad that they did not choose to attend this conference, but maybe you'll get them the next time.
Thank you. We have a third question. I think this question will be dedicated to Mr. Agboro. The question deals with the role of SMR in the future for the desalination of water, especially in African countries. Could you elaborate on this point of the use of SMR for the desalination of water? And is it already in the agenda of nuclear deployment in Africa?
Thank you. I'm going to expand my answer. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm going to expand my answer a little bit. Yes, several African countries, particularly the countries in Northern Africa, Morocco, for example, are looking at deploying SMRs for desalination of seawater. And but I want to use this opportunity to speak more broadly about the deployment of nuclear power in Africa. And there's a lot of discussion about SMRs recently, but every time you hear about SMRs, it's in 10 years' time, maybe in 12 years' time. I don't think it's really going to happen that quickly, because the continent that really needs power right now is Africa. Most other parts of the world already have power, and they are not in such a hurry to have SMRs deployed. Most of the African countries that are engaging with external partners on the deployment of SMRs, for example, are doing it individually. And I don't think that's a good strategy, because, for example, you cannot go to Mercedes-Benz or BMW and have them open the factory to build 2 cars. I think the strategy that will work in Africa must be a multilateral approach in which African countries come together, pool their resources, and approach SMR vendors as a group that would make a strong market case. That's also something that would be more palatable to the banks that are financing these projects. There aren't that many big economies in Africa where individual countries can finance nuclear power projects, where we're looking at something like $8,000 per megawatt of electricity produced. It's going to take a very long time to get a return on investment on that. And there are issues of nuclear safety and nuclear security and non-proliferation and insecurity in general. So a multilateral approach, whether it's SMRs or the big builds, is what is going to work in Africa. I don't think the individual approach will work. And of course, like I said in my statement earlier on, we have the African Commission on Nuclear Energy that was established to coordinate nuclear-related activities and cooperation in Africa, we can create a forum where African countries can come together to share ideas, exchange best practices, and to form common positions and groupings, so that we approach vendors and technology providers as a group. The idea of multilateralism is not new. And when the IAEA was being established in the 1950s, the idea was to have a multilateral approach where the IAEA was going to own and operate all nuclear facilities that produce fissile material. And I think this approach came up again in around 2004 when then DG El Baradei was proposing a multilateral approach to the nuclear fuel cycle, because even if we like it or not, nuclear safety, nuclear security, non-proliferation, these are factors, and the ability of countries to pay, these are factors that must come into play. So it's not really going to work in Africa, with the individual approaches. And the way it's working so far is vendors approaching individual countries. With 80-odd designs of SMRs out there to be considered, I think we really need to sit together and decide which technology we want, how to fine-tune that technology to the needs of African countries, and work together through the institutions that we have. For example, the African Commission on Nuclear Energy, which was established for that purpose. The idea started in 1964 at the first summit of African heads of states. So these are all things that we should look at. And SMRs are not necessarily, or may not necessarily be the best approach for African countries. They have their place, for specific spatial applications like desalination. But when you look at the financing, maybe the big builds are cheaper in the long run if we use a multilateral approach, if we have regional grids to hold these big reactors, if we pool our economies and our money to pay for these reactors. This is a sort of part of a discussion that I had recently at the INMM conference in Vienna, and I will be happy to elaborate further. I don't want to take up the time of the meeting here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agbo. I think that there is an answer by Bill McWood.
First, let me thank Mr. Agbo for his comment. I think at first, his last comment about countries working together to look at these technologies, I think that's something that makes a great deal of sense, and certainly be happy to engage and discuss that with you and perhaps assist in that. But let me just sort of race to the defense of small modular reactors on this basis. We've been spending a lot of effort to look at each of the technologies very closely. And I'm now convinced that there's going to be at least a half a dozen or so SMR technologies of different types that will be on the market around the 2030 timeframe. And so they are going to be viable near-term options for countries around the world, not just in Africa. And as you pointed out in your comment, that some of them have specific applications. For example, if you want to provide for heat for desalinization, there's probably nothing better than a high temperature gas reactor, and that's going to be available in the 2030 timeframe. So it's going to be very important for people to understand what the real options are. I agree with that. And if there are some more exotic technologies that are 10 or 20 years out, let other people worry about that. You can focus on the things that matter in the near term. But there are going to be options. There are going to be technologies, and I think it's too early to decide today whether all of the investment should be in large light water or a particular small modular reactor technology. But we're going to know a lot more in the next 5 years. And I think that we'll be able to see what those options are. And then each country can make a decision as to what direction it wants to take. And if there's an option to do this on a multilateral basis, there's a lot of advantages to thinking about it that way.
Thank you very much. We are close by the schedule, and I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience for their contributions. I feel that this session was really rich in terms of exchanges and show that the subject could benefit from further work in the near future. And then on several aspects which have been discussed this afternoon, the role of international organizations such as OECD could be crucial. But well, before closing this session, I have the honor of inviting Amélie de Montchalin to give us a concluding message on this session dedicated to nuclear energy in Africa.
Merci beaucoup et merci pour ces échanges très fournis. La première chose, c'est je pense qu'il faut se souvenir que l'électricité, c'est quand même la base, comme l'a dit le directeur général, de l'accès à l'eau, de l'accès à la santé, de l'accès à l'éducation, de l'accès à la mobilité propre. Et que, comme vous l'avez bien dit, s'il y a trop de dettes, il n'y a rien de tout ça, mais s'il n'y a pas de dette, mais qu'il n'y a pas d'électricité, il n'y a non plus aucun de ces progrès. Et donc, je pense que le sujet de l'accès à l'énergie, l'accès, comme le dirait Fatih Birol, à tous les moyens de cuisson qui ne dépendent pas des arbres, sont non pas des discussions qui ont l'air sympathiques parce que concrètes, elles sont essentielles. Donc, je pense que le point d'entrée, c'est vraiment l'accès à l'énergie. Il y a quelques semaines, on se réunissait avec une soixantaine de ministres sur les enjeux d'efficacité énergétique. C'est un peu le même genre de questions. Dans les pays de l'OCDE, ce sont des questions de réduction de notre consommation d'énergie pour maintenir notre prospérité. Dans les pays africains notamment, c'est une question de donner accès à plus d'habitants à des biens de base. Et donc, je pense que cet enjeu, il est majeur et je pense qu'il faut bien replacer, comme on disait, ce n'est pas le nucléaire pour le nucléaire, c'est le nucléaire pour faire de l'électricité, pour avoir accès à un développement économique, humain, de qualité. Et je pense que notamment les enjeux liés à l'eau sont des enjeux très importants parce que désaliniser, ça consomme beaucoup, beaucoup d'énergie. On peut le faire avec des panneaux solaires, on peut aussi le faire avec des énergies qui n'émettent pas de CO2. Deuxième point que je retiens, c'est ce que vous avez dit sur les compétences et les échanges, monsieur le directeur général, notamment les fellowships. On peut évidemment former dans les pays qui cherchent à développer le nucléaire, c'est essentiel, mais on peut aussi accélérer cette formation en accueillant davantage d'étudiants, de cadres publics, de cadres techniques. Et je pense que là-dessus, peut-être que l'OCDE pourrait nous aider à avoir une vision plus complète de où sont les compétences, où sont les ressources, où sont les besoins, et qu'on ait une vision, grâce au centre de développement, plus claire. Troisième point, c'est sur les institutions et les lois. C'est extrêmement important, comme je le disais en préambule, que le développement, y compris de nouvelles technologies, se fasse dans un cadre juridique de gouvernance qui tienne le temps, et qui tienne le temps long. Et on sait que c'est ça qui est le plus difficile à créer dans des pays qui parfois connaissent des soubresauts. C'est pour ça que les institutions, leur indépendance, leur solidité, grâce à des lois fortes et des lois qui ne changent pas trop souvent, c'est essentiel. Quatrième point, et ça fait le lien avec les membres de l'Agence pour l'énergie nucléaire, formidable si vous avez effectivement des plateformes régionales, et peut-être qu'il faut réfléchir, monsieur le directeur général, à une manière d'associer tous ces pays très nombreux qui s'intéressent au nucléaire. J'ai une liste sous les yeux qui a été préparée par des experts français. J'ai quand même en tête que 19 pays aujourd'hui africains ont exprimé un intérêt pour l'énergie nucléaire et sont identifiés comme tels par l'AIEA. Je pense que ces 19 pays, il faut qu'ils trouvent une place, peut-être sur un modèle d'association comme le fait l'Agence internationale de l'énergie, et que vous puissiez participer aux travaux, que vous puissiez avoir accès aux informations, que vous puissiez avoir accès aux débats, et c'est vraiment l'esprit du sommet dans lequel se tient cette table ronde. Le sommet pour un nouveau pacte financier, il a aussi évidemment beaucoup parlé de financement, il a aussi beaucoup parlé de gouvernance. Et l'ouverture que nous donnons à des institutions qui sont nées juste après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale ou dans les années 60, à des pays qui aujourd'hui sont légitimes à nous revendiquer d'avoir une place dans nos débats et pas seulement être des clients finaux de ce que nous produisons et sur lesquels, au fond, ils n'ont qu'à dire oui ou non. Je pense que c'est essentiel, y compris pour la crédibilité, la légitimité des travaux et leur pertinence. Dernier élément, et je rejoins complètement ce qui a été dit par notre collègue américaine, les enjeux de financement sont essentiels. J'ai été très alertée par vous, monsieur le directeur général, sur ces enjeux de blocage de principe, non pas seulement de la Banque mondiale, mais aussi de maintenant toutes les autres banques multilatérales de développement, de tous les financeurs multilatéraux. C'est un énorme problème parce que aucune entreprise privée, aucune banque privée seule ne pourra participer. Si on a des financements uniquement en coût de marché, ce sera beaucoup trop cher, donc il nous faut des financements multilatéraux et concessionnels, et donc il faut qu'on puisse lever ce blocage, ou alors, dans ce cas-là, il faut qu'on se dise qu'on vous transforme aussi en une institution multilatérale capable de financer, parce que sinon, on va quand même tourner en rond. Donc, vous souriez, ça veut dire que vous avez espoir que d'autres le fassent à votre place, mais dans ce cas-là, il nous faut absolument travailler sur ce sujet. Une idée pourrait être potentiellement que votre conseil, le groupe des pays qui sont réunis au sein de l'Agence nucléaire pour l'énergie nucléaire et un certain nombre de pays associés, membres, intéressés, puissent collectivement porter cette position à la Banque mondiale ou dans les cercles multilatéraux, et qu'on puisse remettre le sujet à l'agenda de manière déjà unifiée Nord-Sud, déjà unifiée États-Unis, Europe, Afrique, par exemple. Ce serait très intéressant d'avoir une démarche qui soit un peu différente que de se dire que les États-Unis, la France et le Japon vont arriver à la Banque mondiale en disant on a une idée. Peut-être si on arrivait à avoir cette dynamique collective, on a de meilleures chances d'aboutir. En tout cas, merci beaucoup pour votre engagement. Je pense que beaucoup d'autres sessions sont nécessaires et une forme d'association, je pense, de ces pays intéressés aiderait probablement à pérenniser ces échanges. Donc, j'étais très heureuse d'être avec vous. Et sachez que le gouvernement français et ses plus hautes autorités voient d'un très bon œil ces échanges se développer et que donc nous les encourageons, nous les soutenons et remercions les équipes aussi de l'OCDE et de l'AEN pour leur soutien permanent.